Hi, I'm Tim. I am the Tinkering Turtle. Today we're going to be replacing the brake calipers on the KBO Breeze step-through. I talked about this in my last video. The brakes are a little bit finicky to adjust on this bike, the calipers are, so I decided that I want to switch them to mechanically actuated hydraulic brakes. And I bought a couple calipers off of Amazon. I paid, I think, $53 shipped with Prime. So for two calipers for $53, so that's about $26 a piece, give or take. So it's not a really expensive upgrade, but it's something that I wanted to do. I know this rotor down here is slightly warped. I did get a tool to adjust that. I won't be showing how to adjust that on the video because I'm not an expert and I don't want to put bad information out there, but I am going to attempt to straighten up that rotor myself. So without further ado, let's get into it. So here are the tools and components that we're going to be using today. You got a pair of vice grips. I'm going to use those for us. I'm going to pull the pads out of the calipers and wipe them down with the isopropyl alcohol and the rags. I do that with every new pair of pads just in case they've gotten contaminated with oil at some point. I don't want the oils to create a squeak or anything, so I clean them off right when I put them on the bike. I've got the metric Allen wrenches to help remove and install the calipers. I also have, this is a tool from Park Tool that actually will help me take the warp out of the rotors. I'm not going to show how to use that today. The reason I got it is I know one of the rotors on the bike is warped and I want to try to fix it, but as I've never done it and I'm not an expert in that, I'm not going to show how to do that on the video, but I did get the tool so I can attempt to fix that rotor. I got two HB100 mechanically actuated hydraulic brake calipers, and those will be installed on the bike today. Okay, we're going to start with a 5mm hex wrench, and that's just to remove the old caliper off of the bike. Now I'm probably going to have to end up using these same bolts again, so just set these aside. So now that the brake caliper's off, I'm going to want to loosen the crimp on the cable. Then I can slide the cable out, and that removes the caliper. One thing I want to point out is this caliper comes with this yellow tab installed. That's to stop the pistons from pushing in without the rotor being in place, and the pistons can actually pop out. When they pop out, it ruins the caliper. That's why they put this protector in there. The mechanical calipers don't have that limitation as much, and it's harder to ruin these, but you can ruin hydraulic ones very easily by actuating them with this removed or not having a rotor in place. Okay, now that this is loose, what I want to do is go up above and adjust the barrel adjuster all the way in so I have maximum adjustment up there. Now to do that, you just loosen the lock nut all the way and then tighten this back in. Get this all the way in, you have maximum adjustment for your adjusters. Okay, the next step is it comes with this bracket here. I don't think we're going to need that, so I'm going to remove that. And let's just take these two bolts out. And that removes that bracket off of it. I think we're going to end up using the original bracket here, but we got to test that out. Okay, before we get started, I'm going to remove this tab. Remember, don't actuate the calipers with this tab removed. I'm going to pull that out. I'm going to remove the cotter pin. That's what I'm using this for, the needle nose for. So straighten out the end of that cotter key. And then pull the pin out. That's nice and straight. Now the reason I did that is I'm going to remove the brake pads. Let's see how to do this. Oh, they come up. This type comes up through the top. That way the brake pads are removed. Now I'm going to go get a pair of nitrile gloves so I don't touch the pads with my skin, because I don't want oil on the pads or the rotor. So I'm going to go get a pair of gloves. Then I'm going to clean the pads off with isopropyl alcohol. So I'm going to pull these pads apart. And I've got a little compression spring like most brake systems do. I put a little isopropyl alcohol on the rag, and I'm going to get any kind of oil or dirt I can off of that brake pad. You see how the dirt's coming off. Because if you got oil on your brake pads, it can cause a resonance and create a squeal or a squeak. So that one's clean. I'm going to flip it over to a clean side. A little bit more isopropyl alcohol. Clean the other one. Now that I have both pads clean, I'm going to want to go and take a run around the rotor and make sure that there's no residual grease or dirt on the rotor, both sides. That should be pretty clean. Okay, I'm going to take my spring, and there's a hole in it which corresponds with the hole on the pad. Now line those up. Put the other pad on. So once I get the pads on the spring, I'm going to slide them back down through the top until that hole lines up for the cotter pin. Slide the cotter pin in from the back. And then that sticks out, and you just simply bend that back up. That way the cotter key can't come out and the pads are in place. Okay, here's the bracket that came off the bike when I took the other caliper off. I'm going to place that. The top bolt will always be the longer bolt because it's the longer side of this bracket. This is the shorter side. I'm going to slide that up on the rotor. Careful not to touch the rotor with your fingers. Then you run the bolt up until it's still loose, but it's all the way on. You repeat the process on the bottom. So at this point, your caliper should be loose on the rotor. You want to adjust your barrel adjuster all the way in and loosen your crimp. And then you'll run your cable down through the barrel adjuster and through the crimp. Make sure that the silver part's down inside the barrel adjuster, both up above and down below. I usually try to bring this up just a little bit to give a little bit of pretension on the cable. You don't have to bring it up very far, and you may have to adjust that a couple times, but then tighten the crimp all the way down. This is slightly actuated. That way when you squeeze the handle above, you'll get full actuation. So now squeeze the handle up above, and while you're holding it, then you want to tighten down the mounting bolts to the caliper. This tightens the caliper centered on the rotor. And I like to do a little bit on both bolts and alternate them a little bit. That way it doesn't pull one side as you do it. Okay, now that those are tight, the caliper's tight, the crimp is tight, you can lift the bike and listen for any sounds. Now this has a slight rub in one part, and that's because the rotor's warped. I'm going to go ahead and fix that. But typically you would find that there's no sound and you're ready to take this out and bed in the brakes. But I need to make some slight adjustments to the rotor, so I'm going to do that now. Again, not going to discuss that too much on camera, but I'm going to do the work here and you can watch me do it. Okay, I've got the warp pretty much out of the rotor now. I spin it, there's absolutely no sound, so I think we're good. Let's move on to the back brakes. Okay, the procedure should be identical for the back brake. You simply remove the two mounting bolts, the crimp, and that takes off the caliper, and repeat the process the same as we did on the front. These are the two bolts that came off of the thing. I'm probably going to use two new ones because it looks like those are the same size and they've got fresh Loctite on them, so I want to use two of the new ones when I put the other one back on. That's the old caliper. Here's the two new bolts. We'll set those down here and remove the tab. Straighten up the cotter key, pull that out from the back. I always got a slight bend in these cotter keys, so you got to finish flattening them out so they're easy to get back in. Get the cotter key straight and remove the old mounting bracket, or the new mounting bracket that came with the caliper. Okay, then I want to slide the pads up and out and repeat the process for cleaning the pads and the rotor that we did on the front. Grab a fresh, clean cloth, isopropyl alcohol, and this is the grease and dirt that could cause issues with squeaks and squeals. Now if the pads are clean, I'm going to want to go around the rotor and make sure those are clean. And I'm just leaning it up on the kickstand so I can rotate the tire, making sure I get both the front and the back. Get all that stuff off that I can. One thing I want to point out, I do kind of like this design because it's really easy to pull these up and out. You could theoretically do it while it's still on the bike, although it'd be difficult to kind of get in here and work on that, but you could pull the pads out, clean them, and put them back on the bike without removing the caliper. At least theoretically. I don't know in practice if it's that easy, but it's an interesting idea. So basically I'm lining up, I'm looking down in here to make sure that the outside edge of the rotor is in kind of the proper place so you got a good engagement of the pads. And I'm going to attempt to get these bolts started again. This back one's in kind of a tough position. Okay, tighten it up. And back it off so it can still move. The caliper's on. These are pretty much tightened down. They're just slightly loose so the caliper can move. I'm going to adjust this barrel adjuster all the way in on both down here and up above. Okay, then we've loosened up the crimp bolt here. We're going to lift up the little bracket and slide this underneath. Sliding the cable up underneath the crimp bolt. Again, we make sure that the silver part goes all the way up in the barrel connector, and we check that both down here and up above at the brake handle, which up above looks good. Now I'm going to put a slight pressure on the actuator arm. See if I can show this. Just a little bit. Pull the cable through. You don't want to do too much because then you'll take up some of the actuation, but you want to do a little bit just to preload it. Okay, that looks good. Probably want the cable on the outside. You don't want it sticking in where it could catch the spoke and either make a sound or, worst case, get caught up and be a problem. Now, because it's the rear brake and I can't really hold the handle and tighten it up, I'm going to use a clamp to hold in the brake while I tighten up the mounting bolts. Now, with the clamp holding the brake handle up above, you see the calipers tight. You want to tighten down the 2 mounting bolts. Now, this back one's a little tough to get to, so it's going to take a little extra work. That one's tight, and I'm going to remove the the clamp from up above on the brake handle. Now that the clamp's released up above, I'm going to lean this over. Now, if you do find some noise, all you have to do is loosen one of these up and slide it back and forth until you get it centered. And it looks good. So now that I've replaced both calipers, I've got them adjusted, there's no sound as you spin the wheels. I'm going to take the bike out, I'm going to get the battery, I'm going to go take the bike out, and I'm going to bed in the brakes. Bedding in the brakes is a very important process. You should do it whenever you put in new pads, or in this case, new calipers. And what it entails is you bring the bike up to speed, say 15, 18 miles an hour, and then you'll squeeze both brake handles, and you'll come almost to a stop. You don't want to come to a complete stop with new brake pads. What you're doing is heating up the pads and wearing them into the rotor. So you bring it up to 18 miles an hour, you pull both brakes, you slow down to 4 or 5 miles an hour, and then you feather the brakes out. If you stop, new pads, if they're hot, can leave a residue on the rotor, and that residue can cause a squeak or a warp. Or not a warp, but a squeak or a squeal. So you do that 10 to 15 times. Bring it up to speed, pull both brakes, slow down to 4 or 5 miles an hour, feather out the brakes, and start pedaling, get back up to speed. And you do that 10 to 15 times. That burnishes the brake pads onto the rotor, kind of squares them into the rotor, and gets a nice seal on the top of that brake pad so you're not leaving residue every time you stop. I'm going to go ahead and do that now. The only other thing you might want to do is when you pull back these, you want a good thumb width here. Use the barrel adjuster to get the width the same on both sides. And you do that by screwing them out and then locking them down with the lock washer. I've shown that in other videos. If you have any questions, leave a comment below and I'll help you out. Let's go take these for a quick run and bed the brakes and see how it goes. Okay, I've done that 10 or 12 times now. One thing I noticed, I've got a little bit too much or not enough throw on the brake, so I'm going to adjust these barrel connectors again. And I'm actually going to turn them in so I get about a thumb width between the handle and the grip. That'll be a little bit more comfortable when I'm braking. That looks good. So that's the process of putting the new calipers on. These are cable actuated hydraulic brakes with all new pads. They work really good. There's no noise, no squeal. The brakes are nice and firm. I really like them. I will put a link to the Amazon listing in the description of the video. If you have any questions or concerns, leave me a comment. Let me know what I can help you with, and I will catch you next time. Have a great day.